People kept asking why I suddenly avoided her, why I stopped showing up to the things we used to do together, and she had the perfect answer ready. She told them I was jealous. Not quietly, either. She repeated it with a confidence that made people believe it without even thinking. And for a while, I didn't correct it. I just watched how quickly a lie could spread when someone repeated it with a smile. I kept wondering how far she would take it, and what she'd say next to keep the story alive. But the moment her lie reached the wrong person, someone who actually checked the facts, everything flipped. And if you want to hear how fast things unraveled after that, stay with this story. It gets a lot stranger once the truth starts leaking out. When people later tried to understand how everything between Maya and Alicia fell apart, most of them assumed it must have been sudden. Friendships usually break fast in their minds. One day close, the next day avoiding each other. But anyone who actually paid attention would have seen the slow shift, long before the lie ever made it to the headlines. It started quietly. In that way problems do when no one wants to admit something small is becoming something larger. Maya had always been the kind of woman who learned by watching people first. She grew up used to reading the room before she spoke, which made her careful with her energy and even more careful with her trust. She liked her life organized the way she understood it, almost like a drawer where she knew exactly which part held what. It wasn't rigid, just balanced. She worked at a local lifestyle website as a junior editor. A place where the staff was small enough that everyone ended up knowing pieces of each other's lives, whether they meant to or not. She enjoyed the pace, the small victories, the quiet pride she took in doing a good job even when no one was clapping for it. Alicia came later. She arrived with a voice that carried across rooms, a bright presence, a way of talking that made people turn toward her. She wasn't loud in an obnoxious way. She was the kind of loud that reminded people of someone raised to be noticed, and she usually was. She joined the same workplace as a columnist, and although she had barely settled into her role, she made sure people heard her, saw her, remembered her. She became that person who gained popularity faster than she gained responsibilities. They didn't become friends overnight. Their personalities were different enough that people wondered how they even clicked. But sometimes, friendships grow from proximity more than similarity. They ended up in the same group during a company project, then grabbed coffee a few times. Eventually, they hung out outside work. It wasn't the kind of friendship where they shared childhood histories or cried on each other's shoulders. It was the type that forms when two busy adults learn to enjoy each other's presence without having to label anything. For Maya, the friendship felt easy at first. Alicia added color to her routine, and Maya made Alicia feel grounded. It worked, or at least, it seemed like it did. But small cracks formed early. The kind Maya brushed off because she didn't like imagining the worst about someone she cared about. She noticed how often Alicia spoke about her successes, compared to how rarely she asked about Maya's. She noticed how her compliments sometimes felt like they came with conditions. She noticed how Alicia seemed uncomfortable when Maya received praise at work, even if it had nothing to do with her. None of it felt serious enough to call out. Just little things she tucked away in her mind. Everything shifted the first time Alicia's article went mildly viral. It wasn't a huge moment by internet standards, but within their small workplace, it was significant enough to lift her above everyone else. She became the one the editor pushed forward during meetings. She received more attention in a month than some had received in years. Compliments flowed easily toward her, and at first, Maya felt genuinely happy for her. But the change in Alicia's behavior came quietly. Suddenly, the attention wasn't enough. She wanted to keep it. She started talking more loudly about her work, subtly comparing her numbers with others, acting like everyone was competing with her even though no one actually was. She began treating the editorial floor like a stage she had to keep performing on, and slowly, Maya noticed herself being pulled into the orbit of Alicia's need for validation. When Maya found small successes of her own, Alicia responded with half-hearted congratulations, followed by reasons things were going well for her instead. When people complimented Maya in front of her, Alicia immediately chimed in with reminders of her own achievements. It wasn't malicious every time, just habitual. But the pattern grew. Still, Maya didn't walk away. She kept assuming things would settle. She believed people had phases, had moments of insecurity, and she didn't want to judge someone based on a temporary version of themselves. She stayed patient, sometimes to her own detriment. The real trouble started the day Alicia made a careless comment during a team lunch. It was meant to be a joke, something tossed out without thought, but it landed wrong. She hinted that Maya was competitive in a quiet way, saying it like she was sharing an inside joke. People laughed politely. Maya forced a smile, even though she felt something pinch inside her. It was subtle, yes, but it was also the first time Alicia painted her in a way that wasn't true. After that, similar comments followed. Nothing dramatic, just little suggestions that Maya was sensitive or private in a suspicious way. Words said lightly, but repeated enough that people started absorbing them. Slowly, Maya felt the shift in how others interacted with her. She felt certain colleagues becoming careful around her, like they weren't sure what she might say or do. She didn't understand where it came from. She didn't know that sometimes, when someone fears losing the attention they once had, they look for ways to control the narrative around the people closest to them. The lie itself came later, after a work event where someone new received praise that Alicia expected to go to her. She handled it well in public, smiling and posing for photos. But once the crowd thinned, she needed an explanation for why she felt overshadowed. The easiest explanation, in her eyes, was that someone else must feel threatened by her, and she picked the person most convenient to blame. She told a small group that Maya was jealous of her. She said it casually, like she was sharing a concern about a friend, using the kind tone people use when pretending to be worried. It was subtle enough that no one questioned it. They repeated it without checking, the way gossip always finds its way from one corner to another. And because Maya had never been loud or confrontational, it became easy for people to believe she was quietly jealous. For a while, she didn't even know the rumor existed. She just felt the strange distance forming again. People became polite but cautious, friendly but watching. She didn't know why until a coworker accidentally said something that revealed the truth. And even then, she didn't defend herself. She spent days trying to figure out how to address it. Part of her hoped it would die the way rumors sometimes do. Part of her didn't want to confront a friend she still believed cared about her underneath all the insecurity. But Alicia didn't stop. The lie grew legs. It reached the wrong person outside their workplace. Someone who wrote a small column about office culture and used their dynamic as an example of jealousy between women. It became a blip in online discourse. Nothing huge, but enough attention to be embarrassing. Enough that Alicia finally felt her story had weight. Enough that Maya realized the rumor was no longer something she could ignore. The days after the rumor reached the small online column felt strangely heavy for Maya. It wasn't the kind of heaviness that made someone collapse or cry in public. It was quieter, the kind that settles in the shoulders and sits behind the ribs. She still went to work, still submitted her drafts on time, still answered messages, but there was a shift in the air around her, a subtle distance from people who had once felt familiar. She wasn't treated unkindly. No one was rude. They simply behaved as though they were trying not to step on something fragile. She noticed how people spoke to her in carefully measured tones, like they were worried anything they said might upset her. She noticed how conversations slowed down when she joined them, then picked up again once she walked away. She noticed how her editor, who once trusted her instincts, now double-checked her suggestions. These weren't hostile acts. They were small signals that accumulated into something unmistakable. She had been quietly recast in people's minds. Through all of this, Alicia stayed warm toward her in public. She greeted her with the same familiar charm, asked about her weekend, complimented her outfit. From the outside, it looked like Maya was the one pulling away while Alicia tried to keep the friendship intact. This contrast strengthened the rumor, making it appear more believable. People concluded that Maya must feel intimidated, that she couldn't handle Alicia's growing success, that her silence was proof of discomfort or resentment. Maya tried to act normal, but the shift took a toll. She knew she hadn't done anything to earn the label of being jealous, but she also understood how narratives work when repeated enough. She found herself overthinking her expressions, her tone, her behavior. If she kept to herself, she looked resentful. If she tried to speak up more, she feared it might seem like she was trying too hard. The balance she once had was gone, replaced by a constant awareness of how others might be interpreting her actions. The work environment became harder to navigate. Some colleagues were kind enough to ignore the rumor and treat her as they always had. Others chose to keep a polite distance, not because they disliked her, but because human nature often follows whatever story is loudest. And, for the moment, the loudest story was the one Alicia had started. Things escalated when the online column mentioned their workplace again. The writer didn't name them directly, but the description of a rising star and a jealous coworker struggling with change was specific. Enough that people who worked with them recognized the reference was meant to be a light, observational piece about office culture. But its impact wasn't light for Maya. Suddenly, conversations weren't just local. People outside the office were reading about a distorted version of her. What bothered her most wasn't the attention. It was the way the lie seemed to attach itself to everything she did. If she stayed quiet, people assumed she felt overshadowed. If she achieved something, people thought she was overcompensating. If she declined invitations, people assumed she was avoiding Alicia. There was no neutral ground left for her. The turning point happened 1 week after the article resurfaced. The company held a brainstorming session for a new editorial series. Normally, these meetings were lively, with everyone freely pitching ideas. But during this session, every time Maya opened her mouth, she felt the slight pause in the room, the shared look between two coworkers, the polite half-smile that told her they were waiting for her to say something emotional rather than useful. It wasn't intentional harm. It was a bias formed from a rumor they believed to be harmless. When she shared an idea she had been working on for weeks, the response was unusually lukewarm. Her editor thanked her, said they'd revisit it later, then quickly turned to Alicia for input. Moments later, Alicia offered a less developed suggestion, yet it was met with enthusiastic interest. People were nodding, smiling, praising her creativity. Maya sat there with her notes still in front of her, feeling like her work had disappeared the moment she presented it. It wasn't jealousy she felt, if anything, it was disbelief. There was no anger yet. Only a quiet question she kept asking herself. How did a small rumor change the way people saw her so quickly? She didn't confront anyone. She didn't correct the assumptions. She just observed. That's what she had always done best. An observation revealed all the ways the rumor had woven itself into the workplace. The next few weeks carried the same pattern. Alicia gained more opportunities, not because she had intentionally chased them, but because people believed she was the rising figure who needed support. Meanwhile, Maya felt like she was walking through a haze where her abilities were forgotten, behind the shadow of something she never did. It didn't help that Alicia continued being friendly in a way that seemed strategic. Whenever people questioned the tension, she acted gracious, saying she hoped Maya was doing okay, which only reinforced the idea that Maya was struggling emotionally. The situation reached its peak during a company networking event. It was a gathering with external partners, local writers, and industry people. It should have been a neutral space, but by then, the rumor had spread far enough that even some guests who didn't know Maya personally had heard about the jealous coworker. Maya noticed strangers glancing at her in ways that didn't feel like casual curiosity. Some seemed to be evaluating her, like they were trying to match her face with the story they had heard. Maya planned to stay only long enough to be polite. She didn't want confrontation or attention. But as the evening unfolded, she overheard a conversation that shifted something inside her. Two attendees were discussing the workplace gossip, unaware she was standing behind them. They repeated the story with confidence, talking about her as if they understood her life, as if they knew her relationships. They said her name casually, attaching it to traits she didn't possess. They described her as someone who couldn't handle another woman's success, painting her in colors that didn't belong to her. Hearing it spoken so casually by people who had never met her made the lie feel sharper than it had before. Until then, the rumor had lived in her workplace, a space she could manage. But now it had escaped into the world outside, reaching people who didn't know her enough to question what they were hearing. She walked out of the event early, but she didn't go home. She sat in her car for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. She realized something important. She had tried to handle the situation by staying quiet, by trusting that the truth would rise on its own. But silence hadn't protected her. Silence had allowed someone else's voice to shape her story. This was the moment things changed. Not with rage, but with clarity. She understood that the lie wasn't going to fade. It had grown too far beyond her reach. And the person who had started it, the person she once called a friend, was now being rewarded for it. A shift happened inside her then, not dramatic, but steady and grounded. She stopped trying to understand why Alicia did it. She stopped trying to excuse it as insecurity. She accepted what the situation really was. Someone had rewritten a piece of her identity for their own benefit. And people had accepted it because it was the easiest version of the story to believe. This wasn't just office drama anymore. It was something that had touched her reputation, her opportunities, her relationships, and her sense of self. And as she sat there in the quiet of her car, she realized she had reached the point where trying to be patient no longer made sense. She didn't want revenge in the dramatic sense, nor did she want to hurt anyone, but she did want her name back. She wanted the version of herself that had been buried under someone else's narrative. She wanted to reclaim the part of her life that had been taken without her consent. And she began thinking, not with anger, but with intention, about how to do it. When everything finally broke open, Maya didn't rush into anger. She didn't storm into offices or post anything online. She carried the weight of the last few months the way someone carries a quiet truth they've gotten used to holding. And she understood that any move she made had to feel calm and intentional. Like she was telling a story to a friend who needed the full picture. She'd let Elise run wild with her version of events for so long that it was almost strange to think about taking control back. But there was something steady in her now, something that didn't feel like spite or bitterness. It felt like closure, waiting for its moment. She began by going through the emails. She kept carefully filed messages from Elise, asking her to cover shifts, take on extra tasks, review documents that weren't even part of her job. Maya had saved them without realizing they'd matter. Mostly because she was the type of person who didn't delete things unless she had to. Now they painted a clear picture of how Elise relied on her, trusted her, needed her competence, and how none of that matched the lie Elise had pushed out into the world. Along with those, she gathered comments from coworkers who had privately supported her. They weren't willing to stand up publicly at first, but now that Elise's story was cracking, they felt safe enough to send written statements about how things had actually worked there. She didn't collect these out of revenge. She collected them because she wanted the truth to breathe. The next part of her plan wasn't flashy. She reached out to the journalist covering the school scandal. She didn't offer a dramatic confession or a heated rant, just a calm explanation about a pattern of behavior Elise had hidden. The journalist didn't promise anything. They rarely do both. The tone shifted once they realized how Elise had used the jealous coworker angle to protect herself. They asked for copies of the emails. They asked if Maya had witnesses. They asked questions in a way that made Maya feel, for the first time, that someone was looking at her instead of past her. And while this was moving in the background, Maya kept living her life. She still went to the grocery store early on weekends, still took long walks when she needed to clear her head, still met her sister for dinner, even though she knew the conversation would circle back to Elise before the night ended. But she was different now. Something about finally stepping forward with the truth made her feel lighter, even before anything came of it. The real shift happened when the second article came out. It wasn't about Maya, specifically her name wasn't included at her request, but it was about Elise's repeated behavior, the pattern she'd built by blaming anyone who questioned her. The article laid out inconsistencies in her statements, connected them to records and dates that didn't match, and showed how she had pointed fingers at the people around her, instead of taking responsibility. There was nothing sensational about it. It was factual, restrained, and clear. But people read it, parents read it, staff read it, and the comments section told its own story. The old rumor about jealousy evaporated almost instantly. For the first time, Elise didn't have anywhere to redirect the blame. After that, things didn't explode. They unraveled, meetings were held. Elise was asked to step aside pending further review. She tried, predictably, to suggest that the timing was suspicious, but the tone had shifted. The people in charge weren't nodding along anymore. They weren't asking whether Maya had been jealous or emotional or sensitive. They were asking Elise for documentation she couldn't provide. They were asking for proof she didn't have. For Maya, watching the unraveling wasn't satisfying in the way revenge might look in a movie. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like watching a storm that had been building for years finally run out of places to go. She didn't need to be in the room for any of it. She didn't ask for a personal apology. She didn't send Elise a message. She just stayed quiet and steady while the truth worked on its own. The school board later reached out privately to let Maya know they were reviewing her termination. It wasn't an admission of wrongdoing. Not officially, but it was clear in the tone that they regretted how things had played out. They offered her a chance to return, but by then Maya had moved on. She'd found a new position at a different school, one that valued her experience and didn't treat her like she was easy to replace. She didn't need to go back to the place that had doubted her. Still, she appreciated being asked. What mattered most, though, wasn't the job or the article or even Elise being held accountable. What mattered was what Maya realized about herself in the process. She had spent so long trying to shrink herself so Elise wouldn't feel threatened that she hadn't noticed how small she'd allowed her life to become. She had stopped taking risks because she didn't want to draw attention. She had stopped stepping forward because Elise always found a way to twist it. And even after leaving that job, she'd carried the habit with her. Now, for the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't hiding. There was a moment near the end of all this where she sat in her living room with the windows open, letting the late afternoon breeze move freely through her space, and she realized she wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not for someone to call with bad news. Not for Elise to start another rumor. Not for a mistake that wasn't hers to suddenly become her problem. She was simply existing, breathing, living, and the quiet felt real again. Not like something she had to earn or protect. Elise, on the other hand, stepped out of the spotlight in the only way people like her tend to, quietly, without acknowledging the damage she'd caused. No apology ever came, and Maya didn't expect one. She'd learned that closure doesn't always show up wrapped neatly. Sometimes it's recognizing that someone can no longer reach you, even if they try. Friends later asked if she felt vindicated. She shrugged, maybe a little. But mostly she felt relieved. The truth had found its place, and she didn't have to fight anymore. She started taking small steps toward things she had put off. She signed up for a weekend class she'd wanted to try. She reconnected with old friends she'd drifted from because she'd been too emotionally tired to socialize. She let herself imagine new possibilities without worrying about who would try to undercut her for wanting more. There was one last thing she did for herself. She wrote down the whole experience, not to publish or share, but to get it out of her head so she could let it go. She wrote about how it felt to be lied about so publicly, how strange it was to see her own reputation reshaped by someone else's fear, and how much strength it took to stay grounded when the world believed a story that wasn't hers. She didn't write with anger. She wrote with clarity. And when she was done, she closed the notebook and put it away. She didn't need to revisit it. She only needed to know she'd told the truth, even if only to herself. Looking back months later, she realized that Elise had accidentally given her something she hadn't expected, a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. The scandal had pushed her out of a job, but it had also pushed her forward. It forced her to redefine what she wanted, what she tolerated, and what she was willing to stand up for. And despite everything, Maya came out of it stronger, not because she fought harder than Elise, but because she chose a different path, one built on honesty, patience, and quiet confidence. There was no dramatic final confrontation, no last-minute confession, no explosive ending. The story closed itself in a much simpler way. Elise faded. Maya didn't, and sometimes that was the most powerful resolution someone could ask for.